Rex Bear Leak Project. How the heck are you? Super excited for this opportunity. We have the man, the myth, the legend, Matthew LaCroix with us. And I remember the first interview I did with Matthew a few years ago. It was incredible. Everyone that we have done since has been amazing. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the Anunnaki. We're going to talk about different symbols. We're going to talk about how important they actually are. And just got an echo. Wasn't that cool? So, Matthew, you look great, man. I'm so excited about what we discussed off air, that the future's so bright, you got to wear shades.
Hey, Rex.
Hey.
It's great to be here. We always have awesome shows. We've been doing this for several years now, going way back to the very beginning. In fact, I want to mention, for those who don't know, a little history lesson. Rex is really the first person who actually gave me a shot on doing a show on a channel that was rather significant. And so I really do owe Rex so much for doing that. And having said that, there are some really exciting changes coming in my life, and I can't share them all yet, but that's what Rex was referring to. But there will be a relocation coming up in my life here, and there's going to be quite a few big changes that a lot of people will be really happy about. So I can't announce all of them yet, but there's a lot of good things to come. So Rex, we're going to be sitting down today to discuss some ancient mysteries, symbols, answer some of these, I guess, largely unanswered questions that a lot of people consider are still floating around with a lot of different opinions. And I want to try to take some of that evidence from everything I've studied and so many of the other great minds that have come together to really piece together and understand where we came from. How old is our story? Who created us? Are we just simply a Darwinian ape that's some kind of a collaboration of a Denisovian and Neanderthal that came out of nowhere? Or is there more to the story? A lot of those questions have remained somewhat unanswered in a lot of modern academia. And today we're going to be digging into evidence that proves, in my mind, really who those creators were, who those influences were, where civilization came from, and how these important symbols play a role in all those things. Because it all comes down to an umbrella of understanding, an umbrella of knowledge that covers huge wide areas that if you study just one little piece of it, you're really going to miss the bigger picture. So today we're going to try to get a lot of those questions down into a comprehensive presentation with some good slides today, Rex.
Great. And since we're looking at two of my favorite images here, the Anunnaki lunchbox, the Anunnaki Rolex, and the pinecone pineal gland. So I'm going to give you my quick theory here, and it might not even be close, but is the bag here, the Anunnaki lunchbox, is this the May, which is the me, which is DNA?
We'll get into that. I don't want to spoil anything too fast yet.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we are going to talk about it at the beginning because
Yeah.
I saw this. Okay. Well, we're going to take it at your pace, but that's my possible theory.
Okay.
And so where are we going to start, man? I'm going to hit the mute button right now. Mute.
Well, we're going to start from the very beginning. I want to lay out a little bit of a framework and understanding for those who are familiar with this work and then those who are not. Now, I just want to point out that there are some who have seen a previous presentation I did similar to this. I've added some new slides, some new information, expanded on a number of areas. So for those who have already seen some of this, there's more that's in this presentation. I guess it's a 2.0 on the other version. But so let's get into it, Rex. Let's jump right in. We still have so many questions remaining for a lot of the things that I mentioned before. I still get asked all the time, on the Anunnaki real, what do they look like? Where do they come from? Are they a reptilian? What is this, as Rex called a lunchbox, or as it's commonly referred to, some kind of a handbag symbol? And what is this pine cone? And why is he wearing some kind of a watch way before watches were ever invented? We're going to get into all that as we start here. But before we do, and before we get into those really detailed discussions, we got to lay out a framework here to understand, because not everybody's on the same level. And this is also helpful for a lot of other people that are still putting these pieces together as well. Symbols play the biggest role of all, even more so, I would say, than writings. Symbols play the biggest role in understanding the past. Ancient cultures were brilliant, in many ways a lot smarter than we are now, and they realized that the only way to preserve a message was to create either a template like a cuneiform tablet where you could etch it into clay and then bake it so it could survive for lengthy amounts of time. That was a way to preserve a writing. But how do you preserve a message? How do you have a message that has many, many different meanings, both linear and nonlinear? How do you represent that? How would you do it? You'd use a symbol. Symbols is really the language of the ancient people. And this is one little depiction just to give some people a reference on those symbols. And the first thing to bring up on symbols, though, is that the way that we view symbols today and the definitions that we have in our minds is not necessarily what was supposed to be originally, meaning that a lot of symbols over time, as difficult as it is for some watching this that are super patriotic, maybe they're from the United States and they're waving some banner, some flag, or maybe they have an eagle out on their front step. They're patriotic and proud of that eagle. But quickly, when you look at it and you start to dig in, a lot of these symbols have been inverted and we've been taught a very incorrect definition for what they really mean based on certain parties and interests wanting to have a certain perception in society of those things. For instance, if you were to realize that the eagle represents conquering and masculine power and controlling and dominating over the natural world, you might not be as happy to have that symbol on your flag or crest. Really, once you start digging in, and I have that graphic up in the corner of the screen, and I talk about this all the time when I discuss the eagle and the serpent, but you'll see that almost any country throughout history that was a warring empire, at least during some extended time period, had an eagle on their crest or seal. And the more that I started seeing that, the more that I realized that this was telling a story. This was representing the true mentality of a people, of a nation, not what they're saying. Instead of what someone's saying, you judge them on what their actions are. And clearly you can see that the war eagle has taken over and basically conquered much of our world, which is why it's no surprise that a lot of our societies based on supporting powerful military empires that create the illusion of all this conflict when really a lot of it isn't really conflict at all. It's in many ways created conflict. But anyway, that's a whole nother set of topics to discuss because fear is a very powerful tool. But so the image on the left next to the flags, you can see so that's not an eagle. That's actually a serpent or a dragon. Now that depiction with where you see next with his ear, where you have basically the perfect circle representing balance and equal balance across the world. Basically, that represents the serpent of balance and knowledge, and that comes from Teotihuacan in Mexico, and that was an ancient Aztec symbol for a serpent or a dragon. So why would they have something like that if it's an evil symbol? Well, really, what it comes down to is that symbol like the serpent or the dragon was actually a very positive symbol. It represented knowledge, balance and knowledge, and actually feminine creation. The serpent is actually a feminine symbol, whereas the eagle is the masculine symbol. So if you look at polarity and duality, they are the polar and dual opposites of each other, which is why it makes a lot of sense if you think about if you were to create some new nation out of nowhere and you created the nation to be completely sustainable, have no fossil fuels, be balanced all of the earth like an indigenous culture, but without becoming eventually corrupted and turning into war culture. If you had that balance and you were balanced with the earth and you had knowledge of the heavens and the stars, and you built these stone masonry ruins that basically had a balance with the earth, you would be one of these cultures that was based on a polarity balance of knowledge and wisdom and balance with the earth. And that would be the symbol of the serpent. And that's why we see these cultures all around the world have these one or two symbols that I just mentioned, either the eagle or the serpent represent their mentality and their focus. And you find that all over the world. And that's why that big competition we find of the influencers of those and how they eventually became corrupted in many cases, those symbols show that. And we'll get into that as I go along. But I wanted to lay out a framework for how powerful symbols are and how they can be inverted to opposite meanings and have an entire nation, step behind them as a powerful symbol. Now look at the bottom of the screen. You'll see popular symbols with like the common medical symbol, which is actually called the rod of Asclepius. And that's the symbol of the serpent wound around a rod. That's our medical symbol representing medicine, higher balance of energy, higher health, higher consciousness. It's always been the serpent, just like the staff of Hermes on the left you see, used with the wings that come out. Those have been the same symbols all along. And on the right, just one more little comparison to show you, showing you how wings at the top have always represented ascension of energy, and serpents have always represented the energy within us of a higher vibration along our spinal cord. And so that's what the rod represents, is our spinal cord going up into our crown chakra of our brain, showing the path of ascension of higher energy. Now that we've laid that framework, I want to bring these other symbols in that are important as well, and then overlay them, because they all have connections to one another. All right, Rex, before we move on, are you all set?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask one quick question from the audience here, and this is from the live chat, and I want to thank everybody for being here. Enki versus Enlil, is that serpent versus the eagle?
Yeah, and that's something that is one of the premieres of my work that I discuss, is when you really get deep into Mesopotamia and a lot of other places around the world, where you find the different names and incarnations and variations of those two individuals, those two Anunnaki brothers. You find that Enki always had, or at least as his primary symbol, the symbol of the serpent or the dragon was always Enki's symbol. Whereas Enlil, the lord of the air, lord of the sky, he was always shown with the symbol of the eagle, and his various sons and others had those types of symbols. And that's why you see something like when the Roman Empire became powerful with the Byzantine eagle, that was simply a representation of him and possibly his son Ninurta and some of the other individuals that have come along. So it's been more of this puppeteering show with certain cultures around the world to have them be governed in a certain way. And we'll get into that as we go along. Just remember, though, the passing of knowledge doesn't always mean you pass along good knowledge. What if you were to pass along the knowledge of how to create great armies, how to build weapons, how to create an atomic bomb? How could that knowledge impact a civilization? So I just want to keep that in mind, to remember that as we go along. Okay, so there's a lot of this is a collage of images here, but it really gets to the point very, very well. Besides the eagle and the serpent, there are two other symbols that are probably the most common we find in ancient cultures around the world, which would bring you four symbols, right? The eagle, serpent, and then two others that we literally see in every continent, in every place that we find megalithic lost civilizations, or any culture that predates like 3,000-4,000 years ago. We always find these symbols. Now, the pine cone symbol is probably the most popular of all. In fact, it's actually scary when you look into it, how common it is with the elites and places beyond, I guess, the perception of people. Like, for instance, going to a place like the Vatican Archives, or going to the Vatican itself and finding these giant pine cone statues outside, and the staff that the Pope wears has a pine cone built right into it. You know, what does this mean? How do we have these symbols all around the ancient world and still being used today? Well, the easiest way to figure out symbols, if they're used together, in which we're going to get into that there's more than one symbol here that's used. But in terms of the pine cone, we really do know what the pine cone means. That discussion is pretty much over. The pine cone represents knowledge, the passing of knowledge. And that doesn't have to just be showing the pine cone passing to an empty wall, or just a symbol with them passing it. It can show them passing to a certain individual, like a king. And you'll see that it's often the pine cone is being pointed right to the back of their head. Adding a layer onto the passing of knowledge, you find that the human brain contains a very interesting, an interesting functionality within it called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland has been worshipped since before the times of the dynastic Egyptians as the true gateway to, once you have knowledge, how do you comprehend knowledge? How do you unlock your ability to not have filters? How do you unlock your ability to see the bigger picture, to truly understand what these things really mean? And the only way to do that would be to unlock your pineal gland inside us. Now, for those who don't know, it's incredibly interesting if you want to go down the road of this being somewhat of a conspiracy theory. You can find out that if you were to dump fluoride into public drinking water and you were to consume that even on a minor level, fluoride is a neurotoxin. And one of the main things it does is calcify the pineal gland. So not only was it used during World War II with the Nazis playing around with the Jewish camps to try to keep people as dumbed down as possible in a state where they wouldn't revolt, but not only that, to keep them in a sedated state, it causes the pineal gland to completely shut down. So this functionality of passing knowledge and unlocking the pineal gland within us is what I mean about these symbols having many meanings within them. There are layers like an onion to these, and they all come together. Now notice why the pine cone, right? Well, the pine cone represents a collection of seeds, and it also has sacred geometry within it as well, and cymatic designs. It's one of these things that has multitudes of reasons for why it was chosen, but really it's passing the seeds of knowledge. Because if you wanted someone to grow, let's say if you were using someone as a metaphor, as like a plant, and you wanted them to grow, and they were just bare ground at that point, nothing had sprouted, right? They were just a blanket slate. You would pass a seed of knowledge to have them grow, to grow up and learn that information and advance on a way where they just simply didn't understand before. And that's why when we find these symbols and we get back all the way to even things like the Dogon, with how the Dogon had these depictions of the Nomo, if anyone wants to look into the story of the Dogon, that's the being that they supposedly were influenced by, that taught all about the stars and Sirius alignments of all the different Sirius stars and all the knowledge of the cosmos. They were taught that, they said, by the Nomo. And when you look at the image of the Nomo, you find that the Nomo is just a different depiction of Awanas, which is simply the Mesopotamian version of Enki. So that long story, what I'm trying to point out is, when you see someone like the Pope, and he's got the staff with the pine cone on it, not only is that interesting, but he's wearing a mitre hat. That hat he wears is the same hat that the Nomo and Awanas wore, in that symbolic way to show their influences to those civilizations. So think about how bizarre that is. We're told that all this stuff is fantasy and a myth, the Anunnaki and these influences of beings and creating these civilizations and all this stuff. None of it's real. And yet the highest of our religious establishments has a pine cone on their staff and the hat worn by one of the ancient influencers of those cultures. Clearly, they know all of this, right? And they're keeping most of it in places like the Vatican archives. And here we are, Rex, individuals like you and I just have to put all this together in our spare time, because mainstream academia is basically they're not allowed to talk about it, and it's just really sad.
Well, what an honor that we have the ability to research this, and just that inspiration. What an honor. What a blessing. We are so lucky. And everybody watching this is probably doing the same things we are. We're searching for the truth. We're being given this knowledge. We have been given this knowledge. In this presentation, you are passing the pine cone to us.
That's right. I guess I got to be doing like this, right? That's be the way that I should show it. Yeah, it truly is an honor. Thank you for that, Rex. And the one thing I want to point out before I move on from the slide is, we talked about the staff of Hermes before and the rod of Asclepius. Now notice those two depictions in the center of the PowerPoint. They show the pine cone on the very top where the wings are, meaning that the key to all ascension is simply balance and knowledge. The knowledge of balance and the knowledge and wisdom needed provides you the way to the top, the way to, as they've said, heaven and all these other various things along the way. That way, though, the last thing I want to say, that way is being guarded, very guarded by these powerful individuals, like that man down there you see at the bottom, the Pope. That's not the same Pope that's in charge now, but those individuals are tasked simply with protecting that knowledge from us, because it would allow us to be free. And it would completely, the control of religions would fall apart. Everything would change. But Rex, we're going to get into the next symbol, because it gets even more wild than that. It really, and this isn't new information, but it's a way to bring this all in a cohesive fashion that might help others. And I don't want to pretend that I'm the first person to talk about that, because some people came back and were saying, oh, others have discussed this. We're all in this collaboration together. Like what Rex just said, we're the ones doing this, not in the mainstream. So we're all coming together to bring this information in and have discussions and figure out what the truth is, because it is already being hidden from us. And so we're trying to bring it back to the people. And that's the whole point of this. So we got the pine cone down. We discussed the pine cone. Now let's go to its sister symbol that you find almost depicted every time. Not every time, but almost every time depicted. And that is the symbol of the handbag. Now these two symbols go hand in hand. They really do. And that's why it's important to first figure out what the pine cone means and then figure out what the handbag means. Now, I want to just mention one thing really quick is about these symbols. There are two camps of people that fall in line often with this type of research, and you see them all the time. And I'm not trying to put anybody on, throw anybody on the bus, but this is just the way that it tends to work. One group of people tends to think that everything is purely symbolic and that none of it has any physical meaning at all, any actual meaning, and it's all just trying to teach us lessons. Whereas the other group of people sees things like this, for instance, the depiction on the right, that depiction from Mexico, La Venta, Mexico, it's an Olmec depiction. They'll see that dragon up there and they'll say there was a dragon there that gave them that information. And they'll take everything in a linear way. And then I mentioned the other one everybody takes it in just a symbolic way. What I've found is that the truth is right in between. It's not one or the other. It's right in between. Some things are supposed to be symbolic and some things are supposed to be literal. Okay. There was never really a dragon there. Remember, that's just a symbol for the serpent, which a dragon is a variation of that. That just shows their symbol, those influencers, them being there, providing knowledge to that civilization. And their symbol, Enki or whatever group was part of that, Thoth, whatever group you want to mention as part of that, their symbol was simply the dragon or the serpent, the knowledge bringers, the knowledge providers. Okay. Well, there are others in this involved in this. And we'll get to those in a second. Now, if the pine cone is how you pass knowledge, then what would you represent if you were the keepers of all knowledge? So if you were the ones who had all knowledge and you were the ones protecting that knowledge, you would have to have a way of showing that that knowledge is somewhere safe, somewhere that it can be protected, somewhere that it can stay inside. So really, if you think about it, the pine cone goes in the handbag, but neither of them are real things. They're both symbols that represent both the passing of knowledge and those who have all the knowledge. And I mean all of it. Everything from the knowledge of creating civilizations, the knowledge of creating war, the knowledge of how to start agriculture, the knowledge of astronomy, the knowledge of mathematics, metallurgy, fermentation of things, how to the domestication of animals. Every single one of those things, the knowledge of those things came and it was handed down to Sumer. And the Sumerians clearly state that in their tablets, their ancient cuneiform tablets, they state that they didn't invent any of it. In fact, if you look at one of their cylinder seals, VA 243, before even the telescope was invented, the Sumerians knew every single planet of our solar system, and they knew exactly the size ratios of them and how they aligned. How could a culture like that have known that without a telescope? Not to mention all of the knowledge that they got to create these civilizations out of nowhere, how to clear out the channels of rivers so they didn't fill up with silt so you could use them for agriculture, how to take these base metals like iron, copper, melt them down and then create tools and different things. All of this came from these creators. So really, when you come down to it, the pine cone is the passing of knowledge, and the handbag is the totality of all that knowledge, those who carry all the knowledge. They have the knowledge of all. And so they're passing this knowledge to create further civilizations. Now, I want you to remember that the image right there at the top left of the screen with the 3 handbags at the top with the vulture on it. Because we're gonna get to that in a minute. But so Rex, And I want to just mention, I mentioned on the right that depiction with the handbag is from La Venta, Mexico, with the Olmec. The one in the center is from Iraq with the Anunnaki passing civilization on. And then the one on the left, the handbag symbols, is from Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. 3 different parts of the world with the exact same symbols being shown for them. How could that be possible in conventional mainstream thinking, with all civilizations not having contact and being only 6,000 years old? It doesn't make any sense, does it?
Not at all.
All right, so we're gonna